Hello, and welcome to the BA Brew. I'm Debbie.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Julie.
And today I'm very excited because our subject is something that might sound a little bit different for business analysts, because the subject is pirates. And I have on the brew with me two people who know a bit about pirates and what pirates got up to. So firstly, I have Alex Barker, and some of you will know Alex from her presentations at the BA Conference Europe and also at the BA Manager Forum. And Alex is very much involved in bringing to all of us in our community and in other communities the Be More Pirate movement. And I'm also pleased to introduce Julie Walker to the BA Brew. And Julie has recently had her first novel published called Bonny and Reed. And Bonny and Reed were two female pirates from the 1720s. So it's going to be interesting to find out from Alex and Julie what we can learn from these pirates. So let's start with you, Julie, first of all. What drew you to the story of Bonny and Reed?
Well, I first heard about Anne Bonny and Mary Read from an Adam Ant song, of all things. I was a big Adam and the Ants fan, and on the Prince Charming album, and for those of us of a certain age, I'm sure we all know exactly what that album cover looks like, stripe across the face. And there was a song called Five Guns West, and in that he was talking about women leaders, women, well, he was talking about Amazonians, but he also mentioned these pirates, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. And I'd never heard of these women before, and I was just fascinated by them. And this was round about the time that Vivienne Westwood was kind of launching her pirate clothing collection, and she was talking about being very inspired by these women as well. And I was just fascinated and really excited to find that, I obviously heard about Blackbeard and people like that. I had no idea at all that there were women who actually went to sea as pirates. And as I kind of started to look into that, the story you literally couldn't make up. Luckily, I didn't have to, because their own story was kind of so incredible. But both remarkable characters. Anne Bonny basically grew up as a plantation owner's daughter in the Carolinas in America. And she basically threw all of that away to marry a really feckless servant who actually she found out very quickly was just after her money, but she was disowned by her father, ran away to sea, and basically just having been with her new husband for a couple of weeks, realised, what she'd lumbered herself with. And she was basically in Nassau in the Bahamas. It was called New Providence then. And until a couple of years before Anne actually went there, it was the most notorious pirate hangout in the Caribbean. And the king had actually sent one of his governors, Woodes Rogers, to bring sort of law and order to the Bahamas. And he pardoned all the pirates on behalf of the king. And so there were a lot of very bored pirates hanging around New Providence at the time. And Anne managed to meet one sort of almost immediately, someone called Captain Jack Rackham. You may have heard of Calico Jack. That's one and the same. And basically, she persuaded him to steal a ship, pull a crew together, and they went off to sea with her dressed as a man. As you do when you're on your honeymoon. And then, again, just if you then sort of take a move back in Mary Read, she was born in Plymouth, had a very unusual childhood. She'd been dressed as a boy, basically passed off by her mother as her dead brother, so that she'd continue to receive money from the grandmother there. And basically, when her grandmother had died and basically left them penniless, because she was a very religious woman and had left all of her money to missionaries rather than continue to provide for her family, Mary had actually gone into service again, still dressed as a boy, but very soon got bored of, actually having to do some fairly hard work. It really would have been quite a task at the time to be a servant, at that sort of level. And she basically ran off to sea, realised almost immediately she hated the Navy. And so she jumped ship in Holland, where the army was recruiting for soldiers. and she signed up as a soldier. And she fought in Flanders for several years, was very, very well thought of in her regiment. Obviously, she was still passing herself off as Mark Reed, not Mary Reed. Women didn't go to war. And I think she'd probably have stayed there had it not been for the fact that she basically fell in love with her tent mate. And obviously decided that, well, actually, this is far more important than me continuing to be a soldier. So revealed herself to be a woman. They were going to get married. The troop, apparently, it was a bit like a Christmas celebration. Everyone was absolutely delighted for them. There was a whip round so that they could actually get some money to put a deposit down on an inn in Breda. And Mary and Arnold went off to run this inn. And she kind of obviously became very famous as, this woman who used to be a soldier. And she would have had, all of her patter about, yes, Mary Reed and Mark Reed, one and the same. Come into my pub, buy drinks, and I'll tell you all about it. Unfortunately, that sort of stability of life didn't last very long for Mary because unfortunately her husband died of a fever. And so she decided to head off to sea again. But she thought, well, may as well try for a new life in the Americas. So I'll head over to the Americas. And somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, that ship was kind of caught up by a pirate ship, happened to be Jack Rackham's. And incredible though it is, there was Anne Bonny. And these two women, dressed as men, were basically facing each other off. And of course, I think it's just that for me, is the absolute magic of it. It's so unlikely, utterly incredible. There's lots of history of other women like Hannah Snell, Christian Davis, either dressing as men to go off and be soldiers or to become sailors, but I've never heard of a story where two women met accidentally in the middle of a sea. And I just thought that was remarkable because if you look at the timings of when they would have met, it was approximately 80 years before Pride and Prejudice was written. So at the time, I remember when this album came out, I was at school, I was doing Pride and Prejudice as a set text. And I thought that all women did at those times was sort of sit at home with their embroidery or their crochet, waiting for Mr. Darcy to knock on the door to say if they'd marry them. And it was just pretty mind-blowing for me, really, that there were women who were going out and becoming pirates. And they really were active parts of the crew. They plundered, they fought, they injured and killed people. They were not in this just for, the costume or anything else. This was a full-time job. So I think just that refusal to follow norms and that they were out there doing this incredible thing. And I just thought, why don't we all know about these women? This is just incredible.
And it's amazing because, Alex, you mentioned Bonny and Reed in your presentation, don't you?
Yeah, I do sometimes. It depends on how much time we've got. And I just want to add on to that, what Julie just said, come on, Netflix, let's get a depiction of this incredible story because it is, it's so remarkable. It's all has all the hallmarks of a story where you think, oh, surely someone's that's fictional. This is too coincidental. And how do they end up, like this? And there's some great lines as well. But funnily enough, pirates, if you look at Pirates of the Caribbean, the most famous pirate sort of fictional story, and even Black Sails, which is my favorite pirate TV show, still don't get the story of Bonny and Reed. It's still dominated by the male pirates and their stories. I mean, even today, with all the understanding of feminism and equality, and we still don't center these women and their story, which is just fascinating and just shows you how much the legacy lives on around. It's still Hollywood still wants to have women in this situation depicted in a different way. The part that I bring up that's in Be More Pirate, which is really interesting, is that there's a famous drawing of Anne Bonny where she is sort of topless and she's carrying the flag and she has surrounded by sort of other pirates. And it bears such a resemblance to Lady Liberty Leading the People, the Eugene Delacroix painting, which is in the Louvre. And he was known to be fascinated by pirates. He was obsessed with the Byron poem, The Corsair. And so it's very, very obvious when you look at the two pictures side by side that Delacroix was clearly just drawing on Anne Bonny to have this incredible, beautifully painted depiction of a woman leading and fighting for freedom. And that went on to inspire the Statue of Liberty. So this through line, the biggest symbol of freedom that we have in the West is a female pirate. That to me
amazing.
Amazing, right?
I love it. I think Anne would have loved that.
It is fascinating that they had the feeling of breaking out of norms, and I think you mentioned norms, Julie, and I really like that, and not applying the assumptions of society, but actually saying, no, I want to do something different. And, when I read the story, and similarly, Alex, when you talk about the pirate code and, how they have their own code of norms, if you like, rather than the one society imposed on them. And the way, if you like, through history, we're sort of encouraged that, the Navy good, the pirates bad. And it isn't actually quite that simple a lot of the time, particularly when you look at the times when these things were going on. And I find that quite fascinating because it causes me to question assumptions and what I'm thinking about things, which is something, as business analysts, we have to do all the time. As business people, we have to do all the time. And so you have that sort of resonance, really, of that, no, let's not just accept what we're told. Let's actually look at maybe something else and something a bit deeper, sometimes within ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting take on it, because if you actually look at the Navy at the time, it had a terrible reputation. The men were kept on really poor rations. Quite often, their wages didn't reach back home. A lot of the wives and children left behind fell into destitution. Because they just had no way to sort of make that living. And really, I think it's fascinating because obviously Anne is a very different case because she came from a very rich background, which she just threw away. But Mary, really the choices for women at the time, they were really quite limited. Prostitution was a very obvious thing. It might be that they could go into service, where again, it would be incredibly long, hard hours, very grueling work for very little money. And actually, piracy was quite attractive to not only men in the Navy. Quite often it wasn't just that if a ship was plundered, they'd be going in to find treasure. They'd actually be looking for other crew members. They would welcome people onto their own ships. And I think that when you actually look at how the pirate ships operated, it was a really attractive model. It seems quite attractive even now. The fact is, it didn't matter who you were, what age you were, what sex or sexuality, it didn't matter what color your skin was. If you did your job and you worked hard, you'd get the same share as everyone else. The captain got twice the share, so some things don't ever change, but you got your equal share of whatever the ship got. And, they were very much encouraged, to enjoy life, that thing of, a short life, but a happy one. And actually, it was probably quite a short life for a lot of people at the time, So actually, it was a possibility that you might actually make enough money to retire. Which for most people, unless you'd been born rich, that was an unthinkable luxury, really. So you can really see why that was sort of an attractive way of life. But I do think that the articles, which was what you mentioned, Debbie, about the fact that they had to sign up to a code of conduct in order to go on a pirate ship, it was actually very democratic. The captain would be sort of selected by the crew and nominated, and he could also be kind of taken away from that position if he wasn't doing what he needed to do. In fact, Jack Rackham had actually got his first captaincy when he basically accused his captain of cowardice, and him and the crew actually set the captain adrift. And Jack was elected as as the captain of that ship. So it was weirdly a very, I think, just a freeing environment for an awful lot of people. You know, they just felt, well, actually, we're working for ourselves now. We're not actually working to make somebody else rich. We're working to make ourselves rich. So I think, you know, there's a lot of parallels to, you know, how we kind of look at things now as well.
And I think this is something you bring out, Alex, isn't it?
Oh,
It's
you
the
know, yeah.
lessons we can learn.
Yeah, I mean, Julie's nailed it. Like, that's everything I would say about it. About, you know, all those pirate ideals we're still not enacting. You know, even the idea that the captain had two times more than the average crew member. We have like hundreds of thousands of percent. Like the leaders of organisations will, you know, I don't know, the CEO of Sainsbury's earned 3 million when they don't even put their staff on living wage, and we're seeing much bigger disparities today. So we still haven't really embodied or embraced a lot of those pirate ideals. And you're right, I think freedom is at the heart of it. It's a really freeing environment for people on all levels, economically, socially, and it's just still incredibly radical. And my mission is to make sure that everyone knows about that and stops. I mean, because the problem is we're still buying into the idea now that the establishment has your best interests at heart on some level, and it's just not the case, and it never was. And that's the biggest parallel, that to a degree, I mean, it's a different context, but there's still sort of being bought into a form of making other people richer, and suffering as a result of it, whether it's suffering, you know, just at a mental health level. I think that this still is incredibly widespread. So bit by bit, I try to work on what that freedom looks like for people in a modern sense and in a modern business sense at an individual level, because it's what you said, Debbie, isn't it? It's norms. The word norm is derivative from normal, right? It's what you think is true around you, and it can be so hard to pull yourself out of away from that, of understanding that it doesn't have to be that way, I suppose, is the best way of putting it, because you know, what is for you is what is. So I'm so fascinated by what has to happen, what kind of interventions and things have to happen in order for people to be able to step back and say, hang on, and do that questioning. What does it take? And it takes different things for different people. That's my experience. And so the more we can design training and learning experiences and workplace environments to enable people to, and, you know, it also comes down to courage, right? Because that's what Anne Bonny and Mary Read had in spades. For whatever reason, we can never really know, Anne Bonny didn't take things at face value. She, you know, I actually wonder about love as a trigger, because love is such a deep sensation when you're in it. It becomes a norm in itself, and it just supersedes everything else in your life. So that possibly like propelled her and propelled Mary when she was Mark as well, in some way. So yeah, I'm fascinated by that.
I think the other thing for me is we live in a world of rules. We have to have rules because we have to have rules of society in order to keep stability in lots of ways. And in business, that translates that we have to have rules and standards and policies and all those types of things. The risk with that is that sometimes if we're looking to innovate, to change, to develop organizations, that we accept rather than questioning. And I think one of the things I remember you doing, Alex, was the exercise you do around when did you last break a rule, and just thinking about that. And that highlighted something quite interesting for me, because I'm such a rule follower in my life. If I'm analysing something, I question the rules. So it was a little bit of an interesting moment for me to actually consider it. But once you do start questioning rules, particularly if you're analysing to improve or innovate, it's amazing how often they're not based on anything really. We're back to norms now. It's just that's the way we've always done it, sort of thing. And I think the idea that we've got almost two people in Bonny and Reed who say, well, actually, we're not just going to challenge rules, we're going to actively operate our lives by working to a different set of rules. I think that's really, really interesting. And I think as people who work as, as I do in business and as business analysts, actually thinking about, well, what are the rules that I value? Do you know what I mean? And one of the things about the whole pirates situation was there was a certain collaborative approach that went on to setting the rules, which I think is also very interesting and relevant to today's world.
Completely is. I had this question come up in a workshop yesterday around the balance between collaborative decision making or consensus based decision making, which is what the pirates did, versus the times when you do need a leader. And also, what comes up for me all the time is, what do we do when we've got an organization of 100,000 people, like global corporates? What does pirate look like in that context in terms of democracy and equity? And because you need command and control to get anything done. Otherwise, I kind of disagree, because I think they're just ridiculously slow moving, even with command and control structures. But I think there's something about the level of trust that you have in your leader. And if you've been allowed to somewhat demonstrate faith in that leader and not have them kind of imposed into the situation, that you have a way of voting your level of faith in what the leadership, then you can sort of allow them to go forth and make decisions, was one thing. And just the recognition that you need that of what is the purpose of this consensus-based decision-making process. It's not to constantly do democracy right all the time, which is like absolutely everything has to be, because it gets very, very tedious. It's almost it's better to think about it like as a way to keep people in check, because if you have, one of the reasons why I say the pirate rebellion is always collective is because if you have one person, one lone rebel, if Calico Jack Rackham was just going forth on his own and had no crew behind him, he can do a lot of damage as a rebel leader on your own. Look at all the dictators of the world. That's why dictators and pirates differ so, because they have this backing of this crew behind them, and because it's a way of sense checking your own ideas. Like if you think, because the thing when I say like write a new rule for sure, but make sure that it's actually going to benefit the majority of people. It can't just be your crazy idea. And there's so much example in the innovation world of, like, I would say a lot of the tech entrepreneurs are creating things without consensus anymore. Like they're just creating because it can be done. They're imposing these new technologies onto the world, and they are changing people's psychologies and behaviors. And there's no regulation, there's no consensus. And a pirate wouldn't behave that way, because it would be a sense that, like, we all want this. We think this is a good way to work and live together. That's my take on that.
That's really interesting. I mean, because Julie, in your book, I think one of the things that really struck me was that sort of collaboration, democracy, abiding by the values that we collectively agree. And there's a lot of strength in that, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that there absolutely is. I think even, in a business environment, to Alex's, just following on from what Alex was saying there, I think it's always fascinating. I think that the strongest organizations that I've ever worked in, it is that sort of collective, it is the collective values. It is actually, we have bought into this. We haven't been told that we're going to buy into this. We haven't just been given something to stick on the side of our computer which says, these are our values. You've actually got to sort of feel those values. And I think if you feel those values lived and breathed, chances are it will attract the sort of people who want to support that. And actually, I think it's those sort of environments as well that are the healthiest, that they encourage conversation and questioning, because I was fascinated by what you said just before, Alex, and I was just wondering whether lockdown has had an impact on people accepting the way that things are, or whether there has been a bit of a shift collectively into us all kind of questioning a little bit more. I'm just sort of thinking, of, a friend who kind of works in finance and has been told he's got to go back to the office 5 days a week. And him and his colleagues have said, no, we're not going to do that. That makes no sense. So I'm just really interested to, on your thoughts on that, whether that's changed anything as well.
It definitely has. And on TIFA, I'd say that it hasn't changed things perhaps as much as we might have hoped. It definitely has had an impact. But the pull of all those years before COVID is still incredibly strong. Environmental pull is huge. I'd say that there's two things that it's done. One is a lot of people had what I call the no one is coming to save you moment, which when you realize, because there was such a catastrophic handling of COVID in the UK, the sense that the people that we value as leaders don't know what they're doing in these really critical moments has made people rethink their own view on leadership and what a leader looks like and whether they are it actually. That maybe they might have a better plan, especially when it comes to just managing neighbourhoods. If you can figure out that you can look after your neighbour better than the government can, then what does that say about your capacities and your capacities as a person and a citizen and as a leader? The second thing is the research that I've looked into on disobedience and rule breaking is that actually the further proximity that you have away from a person that you want to challenge, the easier it is to challenge. That's just a sort of behavioral science thing, that it's just actually easier, obviously, just due to the distance that you have when you're working at home. Yeah. So people have been able to just reclaim a little bit more agency for themselves through that.
That's quite an exciting thing, isn't it?
Well, that's what I was just thinking. I was thinking it is quite interesting. We're at a moment in time where I think there is a lot of exciting things happening, and the mindset shift that I think is underway, and I don't think it's concluded, that has come out of the last few years. It is very interesting because I don't know where that's going to end up, but it has caused a shift. And being somebody who works in business change, something that innovates, changes, moves us forward is always going to be dear to my heart. But anyway, I'll have to end it there, even though I think we could have gone on for about another hour. But I'd just like to say thank you ever so much to Alex and Julie, and I hope you've all enjoyed this episode of the BA Brew. If anybody has any ideas for anything they'd like us to talk about, or if they'd like to contribute to the BA Brew, please email us at babrew@assiskd.com. And otherwise, I'll say thank you very much from me and goodbye.